Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Angry Cast and Fallout Shelter 2022. How y'all doing? We're out there doing quests. We've got people out there leveling up. We're doing all the things we have been doing for weeks now. Are you excited? But I figured we would do some more quests and talk about some things because I just spent 3 hours of my life watching a movie. And boy, whew, what it was. So let's get to it, shall we? Somewhere in my parents' house, there is a picture of me doing an Elvis impersonation. I was younger than the age of 10. I was wearing a white t-shirt, and I think I had on my mom's apron. And I don't know that I was doing it right, because the more I think about it, apron in the front, the capes were in the back. I don't really know if what I was trying to accomplish. But there's a lot of pictures of me dressed up like goofball stuff that and any wonder that I wanted to become an actor. But this one in particular was me doing that, that pose to the side with the arms out, and the microphone up to the face, doing that whole thing, almost doing it like almost into a kung fu kick kind of thing. And so, to give you an idea, that was between the age of probably, 6 to 8, I believe, would have been the appropriate time of age, because, and at that time, Elvis had already been dead for, probably about 5 or 6 years. But my mom was a big Elvis fan, so I was very aware of Elvis in those days. She loved Elvis. She had all the music on tapes and all that stuff. And we had a hi-fi in the living room that we could play the Elvis, and also had an 8-track player. Woohoo! But so there's that picture somewhere of me doing my Elvis. And if I could find it before I release this video, I would put it alongside the video. Highly doubt that that's going to happen. In any case, so this past weekend I watched the new movie about Elvis with Austin Butler and Tom Hanks, and it's on HBO Max now, so you can watch it for free. Basically, you don't have to rent it or go to. I mean, it's not in the movie theater, of course. So yeah, but that being said, it is kind of a thing that I really wasn't sure I was going to enjoy. Not so much because of Elvis. I like Elvis. I like the story. But because of who directed it. And I have nothing against Baz Luhrmann as a director. I have nothing against him. I enjoyed watching Romeo and Juliet. Even though I originally bashed it when it first came out when I was in college, because I was a theater major. And I was like, how are you doing this to Shakespeare? What? This is ridiculous. The guns are swords. Their name, hand me my long sword, and he pulls a gun out of the glove. Come on, and then everything. But hey, how could you not love Harold Perrineau as Mercutio? I mean, that was one of the highlights of the entire movie. Besides Leonardo DiCaprio not really doing Shakespeare all that well. But in any case, but John Leguizamo, I mean, he was pretty good. In any case, Baz Luhrmann, he also directed Moulin Rouge. Everybody, talks about Moulin Rouge with, Nicole Kidman and Ewan McGregor. But he also directed this Elvis biopic, I guess you would call it. It was probably the first one he ever did. And it's told really from the standpoint of not Elvis himself. Elvis is kind of like a part of the movie. And it's a majority of him in the later part of the movie, is his life and everything. But it's really told from the perspective of Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks. Now, everybody can agree that Tom Hanks is one of our most, beloved actors. I mean, I think we can agree on that. I mean, there might be people that don't like his work. Fine, whatever. You cannot disagree that he is not just one of those, icons of film. And he started out on television. I watched Bosom Buddies growing up. I remember Bachelor Party and one of my all-time favorites, Splash. and Big and League of Their Own and Philadelphia and Forrest Gump and Sleepless in Seattle and all these films and Captain Phillips and all these other and he was Sully. He landed the plane on the Hudson. I mean, come on. And most recently, tied to me in this area, he played Mr. Rogers, and you cannot watch that movie and not have emotions about it, either because of his performance or because that it's Mr. Rogers. But I will say, after you watch this movie, you will hate Tom Hanks. Now, you won't hate him as a person. You will hate how good he is at making you hate Colonel Tom Parker. Now, I really had no awareness of Colonel Tom Parker until I was an adult. I knew Elvis, I knew the jumpsuits, I knew the, da-da-da-da-da-da, I knew the Vegas all act, I knew the hell thing, dying on Graceland and dying on the toilet. That's pretty much it. I came into Elvis's career late, because he was already dead. I was 2 years old when he died. So by then it was already, the pictures with Nixon and the taking care of business, baby, and that whole thing. So I really didn't know Elvis in the early years. I didn't know Elvis with Sun Records. I didn't know Elvis with Hank Snow. I didn't know Elvis with, the early stuff before he got, he was in Memphis and all that, and before he got to being a headliner and then headed to the 60s and then all the Memphis Mafia and all that stuff and the drugs and everything else before Priscilla. I didn't know about any of that. I learned that along the way. Now, there have been many depictions of Elvis on screen. We had, I think Kurt Russell played him once in a movie. And he was on an episode. Somebody portrayed him as in an episode, I think, of Quantum Leap at one point during that show. And of course, there's Forrest Gump supposedly taught him how to wiggle, which was funny. Oddly enough, there's a tie-in. Forrest Gump taught Elvis how to wiggle, and Forrest Gump was played as an adult by Tom Hanks, and Tom Hanks played Colonel Tom Parker. So it's just, I didn't know any of that stuff. Like I said, I came into it, at the time where he was in Vegas, and this is where the story really, really, really goes south for Elvis, because he was just worked like a dog. But let's back it up and talk a little bit about this career he had. Elvis, I mean, it was probably in the mid to late 80s where there was still a alive and well conspiracy theory that Elvis was still alive. I mean, that he was still around, that he was hiding out somewhere, that he just, wanted to get away from everybody and decided to just, disappear and fake his death. I mean, we lived in a time where we didn't have internet, we didn't have, all of the source to back these things up or check these out or fact check that stuff. So any of those types of things was all conspiracy theories, all conjecture. We had no way to point to a source and say whether or not it was real or fake. And so there was a lie, this conspiracy theory was alive and well, that he was alive and well. And then, my most favorite depiction of Elvis on screen, Bubba Hotep. If you have never seen Bubba Hotep, I implore you to go watch that movie. It's a scary movie in a sense. It is Bruce Campbell of Army of Darkness and Evil Dead fame, and Bruce Campbell. Come on, playing Elvis in a nursing home. And it's the concept is that Elvis needed to get away from everybody and everything, so he switched with an Elvis impersonator, and the Elvis impersonator is the one who died. And before Elvis could take back the mantle and come back and fully refreshed, he was, I remember he was performing as an Elvis impersonator, and he broke he hurt his back and ended up in traction or whatever, and then he ended up never recovering. And then once Elvis was dead, well, okay, fine, whatever. And then he ended up at a nursing home, and a en route to a museum, a mummy gets, into not driving, but the vehicle carrying a casket with a mummy or a sarcophagus ends up crashing, and the mummy wakes up and comes to this nursing home and starts to feed off of the residents, which nobody tends to think that there's anything wrong with that, because people die under mysterious circumstances, and people die in nursing homes because of their age, and nobody bats an eye. So it's up to Elvis, to in his walker, to combat this evil Bubba Hotep mummy with the help of a wheelchair scooter bound JFK, who is also has his death faked and is residing there. But JFK is played by Ossie Davis. He says, "But you're black." He says, "Well, they painted me that color." So it's really, it's a trip. It is a trip, and it's got some great music. If you love the music of Brian Tyler from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Six String Samurai, you will love the soundtrack on Bubba Hotep. It is an awesome, awesome thing. I highly recommend this movie. The soundtrack, I highly recommend it. It's just, and then go back and watch the movie with the commentary of Bruce Campbell as Elvis commentating on the movie. It's great. It's wonderful. But that's a total sidebar on this. Back to the movie at hand. Elvis, the movie, we'll bring you through. There's no spoilers really here. Elvis is a young boy, growing up in poverty-stricken, was it Alabama or something like that? And he, learns about music from, the blues and these poor, people of color playing. And then he goes to a revival tent, nearby. He sneaks into a revival tent, and he gets touched by the Lord and all that, and he just gets to feel it, and he just goes with it. And there's this white boy that's, what's he doing? He feels the movement, he feels the power. So he likes music, and he goes on, forms this band with I think it's the Blue Moon Boys, and they are they're just doing little stuff, and they put out a little record with Sun Records. And Colonel Tom Parker at the time is managing Hank Snow, who's a very well-known country. This is an old. We're talking not Garth Brooks. We're talking the old country. Hank Williams Sr. and Charlie Pride and all the old. All the really old country stars. And he's managing him, and he's looking for another act to sort of boost things up. And he sees they're at this. I don't know if they're at the Grand Ole Opry, where the hell they're at. But he hears about this guy on the radio that he's like, well, that's they want to bring him on the tour. Well, we're not going to bring this guy. This. I don't want to give in to the epithets, but he's like, we're not going to bring this person. This colored person on the road with us. And that, which is wow. This, you have to understand, this is 1950s. It's the South, so of course it's going to be like that. But he's like, no, you don't understand. He's white. He's white. And he's like, what? And because you get the backstory of Colonel Tom Parker, who is telling the story on his deathbed in a Vegas casino. And it's very stylized. Very, very Baz Luhrmann stylized, storytelling. He's wandering down, the aisles of the slot machines, carrying his IV pole in a gown, talking about, he was, betting on things. That he was the ultimate con job. He was the ultimate snowman. That he called them snow jobs. He would he sold a performance. He sold a show. It was all an illusion, and he needed that. And he saw, wow. I heard this voice, so he goes to check it out, and he sees Elvis go up on stage, and he just watches Elvis do that thing with a wiggle and the pelvis hole thing, and everybody go nuts, and he's like, this is the ultimate show. This is the showman we need. So he starts to get Elvis on tour with Hank Snow, and eventually he bumps everybody else out except for Hank, the headliner, and Elvis, the undercard. And then Hank starts to get a little bit like, hey, look, we can't do this. This is not country music. Nobody is throwing their underwear up on stage when I'm out there. And like, I don't want to ever see that happen. He's like, I don't think you have to worry about that, Hank. So Colonel Parker takes Elvis aside and says, look, I said, he wants you off the tour, and I'm going to have to leave him because I think you're special. So they cut Hank Snow out of the deal, and they go on together. And now Hank Snow is no longer... And this is actually well documented that Hank wanted Elvis on the tour, and that they formed a partnership, and that later on Colonel Parker cut Hank out of the deal and went on with Elvis. Now, that doesn't mean that Hank Snow went off and had no career after that. He still had a career. But it was, not as... He didn't have the career that Elvis did. So Elvis now explodes, and they sort of fast track through some of his life to the point where now that you've got Elvis, famous because he's on TV or he's on the radio, and he's playing a lot, and he's selling a lot of records. And now he's buying his mom Graceland, and he makes his father his business manager, and everybody's doing all this thing. Now it gets into where Elvis is a threat to decency and in the South, and he's a threat to the all the wholesomeness of, because he's singing like he's a person of color. He's singing the black man's blues. I mean, it's that was a big deal to the South in those times. It was segregation. It was not cool. So they threatened to arrest him if he continued to do his act the way he did it. And he goes to a baseball, a ball stadium, and he's being told, you need to go out there and your thing. And just prior to this, he was put on Milton Berle. And they said, listen, you're going to... Or he did that whole thing. And then they said, okay, you're going to go on Steve Allen. The Steve Allen Show. And we want you to tone it down. And then they put him in a tuxedo and had him sing Hound Dog to an actual dog, to in an outfit that he was so stiff in he could not do that wiggle. And he felt embarrassed, but it was funny. And he's promised himself he would never do stuff like that again. He was like, I got to be me. I'm not going to do your thing. I'm going to do my thing. And so he gets in front of this crowd at a baseball stadium, and he just goes off and causes mayhem at the ballpark, and he gets arrested. And in order for him to avoid all this jail and all this stuff, they propose that he has to be drafted into the armed services. And so he goes into the army for 2 years in Germany, and that's where he meets Priscilla Bellew, daughter an Air Force guy, and they fall in love. Now, part of Colonel Tom Parker's thing with Elvis was he has to be constantly available. He has to look like he's always available, because that's the sell. That women love him because they could have him. So he had to cut ties with the girlfriend he had back home. And now he's fallen in love with Priscilla, and it's just wow. Now, throughout all this, there's an entire ordeal where Colonel Tom Parker is pulling the strings on this entire thing, to the point where Elvis is in dire straits, because not dire straits, but he's emotionally, because his mother, who was an alcoholic, died before he was supposed to go into the army. And it's just he is just devastated, and this gives Parker the fuel he needs to take over Elvis and manage him and be that guiding force. Be the guiding force my mother was. And he's oh, definitely. Now, we don't realize, though, at this point yet, that Colonel Tom Parker has signed a deal where he's taking 50% pretty much of Elvis's profits. So it's kind of what an asshole. But no, they get married, they come back, and they're living, and they have a baby, and they kind of fast track through all this into the, Elvis does picture deals, and Elvis's faces on everything from a knitting machine to a bobbleheads and all the merchandising ridiculousness that Colonel Tom Parker was driving. He was selling the name. He was heavily marketing Elvis to make money regardless of Elvis's singing. And then they had him like a 7-picture deal, and then he did the movies, and then supposedly the 60s came along, and Elvis was no longer a thing because the Beatles were now around. And so he does this, like, look, I need to do something. I need to do something big, but I need to do it my way. And he goes and talks to this outside consulting group who wants to put on a Christmas performance, like a Christmas show, but he wants to do it his way. And the guy in charge of it, it took me like 20 minutes to figure out who he was. It's Billy from Stranger Things, and he's awesome. I was like, this guy looks like, who is this guy? And then I finally figured out who he was. And this is the 68 comeback tour where Elvis goes out in the leather outfit and does all of his old stuff, and NBC's like freaking out, and they're going to sue because he's not doing Christmas albums with a sweater on. And this actually happened during the rehearsals. During this is when Robert F. Kennedy was killed. Now, the two impactful things on Elvis's life were, one, Martin Luther King being killed because he knew Martin Luther King, I think, at some point, and Robert F. Kennedy, because it's just these two deaths, these two high-profile people that were killed. It starts to plant those seeds of paranoia, and he's already kind of like dipping into the drugs a little bit, so he's already got that going on. So now we've got Elvis. Paranoid, Elvis having a comeback tour, and trying to resurface and remold his image, and he's back on top now with this 68 comeback special. But it's still the late 60s, early 70s. We're 7 years away from his death, and this is where Colonel Parker pulls the damn coup de grace of ruining his life. Elvis wants to go on tour in Europe. He wants to. There's a running theme throughout the entire movie of him wanting to fly away, of him wanting to be, get on his plane like a superhero and fly. Like he wanted to bust his daddy out of jail and fly away to the Rock of Eternity, that kind of thing. Just that whole motif of caged bird sings kind of idea. And he wants to go on tour in Europe, and Parker won't allow it. The reason being is because Colonel Parker doesn't have a passport, because he's like a man without a country. And if he leaves, he can't get back into the country because he renounced his Dutch citizenship, I think, and he just never, and he was a disgrace in the armed forces, so like that whole thing. So he's trying to get away from it. Now they go to Vegas because he wants to get, now he's got the strike while the iron's hot, and everybody likes Elvis again. He sets up this tour, this residency in Vegas for Elvis, but it pulls him away from the family. And he starts to have to do all these shows, and he's just abusing his body to do it. And Parker starts to, rack up a tremendous amount of debt with the casinos. So he's pushing Elvis to do more so he can get the money to pay down the debt. And he strikes this deal where Elvis has to play for 5 years. He cannot go anywhere else. He has to play Vegas, and for 5 years he will get $1 million each year, and Parker will have his debt wiped out and an unlimited line of credit at the casinos. So now he is just like forcing Elvis to go on stage and just just break his entire body to get it done, to the point where he's like just falling apart, and they're turning to like drugs to keep him on stage, to keep him upright and all that stuff. And he realizes it, and he tries to break ties with Parker. And unfortunately, they find out, and this is where he gets into the paranoid. He's carrying a gun, all this other stuff. There's not a lot of death. I mean, there's death threats, but there's a couple instances where he's like attacked. He's not attacked, but it's like fans, but they don't know, and he's just. Parker's like trying to pretend to be like really caring about him. He just wants to keep the money coming, and we get to this like final act where he breaks up. Like he's like, I'm through with you. I'm never doing this. Now what they depict in the movie didn't actually happen on stage, but he tries to fire Parker, and then Parker sends him a bill for like $8 million of how much he thinks he owes him. And he's like, we can't pay this. And he's like, Dad, we're my business manager. Why were you not paying attention? And it's just the dad has no spine. The dad is a jellyfish the entire movie. So it's just like he's hardly in it, hardly there half the time. He's there, but he's not there. So now we are, right into the end of the mid 70s, and Elvis is, just Priscilla has left him and taken Lisa Marie because of the drugs, because he's never around, because he's just, he's never there. He's just breaking himself for everything. She wanted him to go and break it out, get rid of Tom Parker, but don't go see him in person, because we went to see him in person. That's how he ended up in the Vegas act. And we see one final trip where Elvis is at the airport saying goodbye to Lisa Marie. She's going off to, with Priscilla on the plane, and Priscilla gets in the car, and they have this conversation, and Elvis confides that he's worried that when he dies, no one will know who he is. Nobody will remember him. And she tries to put him at ease in all this. And then he dies. I mean, they go from that scene to he's dead. And I think that's actually not exactly that close in time when that happened, but they really they just pushed through it. And they kind of pushed through the last, I guess the last 5 or 6 years of Elvis's life was sort of like cookie cutter. You could have summed it up in 2 minutes. He's on Vegas, he's fat, he's dead. But they really, really, really just blow through it. And they don't ever show really him, Austin Butler, with the fat suit on. They just said died, and then they show old clips of Elvis. And they showed the last performances of Elvis in Vegas when he was at his heaviest, and oh my gosh, that's not... I don't even remember that Elvis. I don't remember fat Elvis. I remember Elvis in the jumpsuits. I don't remember fat Elvis. But it was just sad. It was sad to see. And Tom Parker lived on to 1997, where he died, in a casino, throwing his entire fortune away in a casino. He supposedly died as almost penniless. But meanwhile, he had taken half of Elvis's fortune to the time of his death. 50% of his... In fact, at one point, there was a $10 million payout. He got 5.5 million, and Elvis took home 4.5 million. That's how shitty Tom Parker was. He was an asshole. He ruined someone. And the saddest part of that movie was we were sitting there watching it and oh my God, he never got to go to Europe. He wanted to go to Europe. He never got to go to Europe. But, that's that entire thing. Now, again, I have no qualms against Baz Luhrmann, although I do kind of said, I can't really sit through his stuff. Not my favorite thing in the world. I actually, after the first 10 minutes, the movie grew on me, and then it was fine. It was just that first 10 minutes, it was just kind of hard to get through. It was very comic booky. It was very, stylized, and I understand why. It was a direction. It was a course. It was a decision, and it makes sense. But it really, it was hard for me to get, because this was supposed to be a true to life, faithful biopic. Not like I'm watching Bubba Hotep and it's Elvis in a nursing home and he's that's comedy. This was tragedy actually. But I really, really, really enjoy the entire thing. Austin Butler did a good Elvis. It was hard to get over his looks at first because he looked like, I forget the guy the persona, but Lady Gaga had this guy persona where she sings the one song against herself, and that's who Austin Butler as Elvis kind of looked like. He kind of looked like he had a lot of this feminine qualities to him. His look early on with Austin Butler playing him. But it worked. I bought it. I bought him as Elvis. I really did. I remember watching the whole Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky American Crime Story, and while Beanie Feldstein pulled off Monica Lewinsky, Colin Firth could not pull off Bill Clinton. I'm sorry. It just did not look like Bill Clinton. Marcia Clark, Linda Tripp, yeah, I bought that. I'm sorry, Sarah Paulson playing Marcia Clark and Linda Tripp, I bought both those performances. I could not buy Bill Clinton. But him, Austin Butler as Elvis, I bought it. Colonel Tom Parker, I've never really seen him in real life. I wouldn't know him if I passed him on the street. But Tom Hanks played him like the Penguin, and he was despicable. And I loved him. I hated to love him. I love him, but I hated that. I really hated Tom Parker at the end of this movie. So that's, there you go. That sums up everything about having to do with Elvis, the movie. Go watch it. It's fun. We're done with the quests. We're done with everything else. I think we're going to open up some lunch boxes. And hopefully we'll find some, in our lunchbox, we'll find a peanut butter and banana sandwich. Oh, thank you very much. And, all this cliches and bad voice impressions aside, we will thank you for watching. Take care of each other. Take care of the planet. Take care of your body. And we will talk to you next time. Have a good one. TCB. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.